If you were with us last weekend, you'll remember that we started a series called Would the Real Jesus Please Stand Up? And we talked about one of the ways that Jesus gets erroneously typecast. We talked about the way that we reduce Jesus to a mere superhero. And last week, I suggested that Jesus is more than a superhero going after a bad guy. We examined the fact that if you set Jesus up as the superhero, then someone has to be the bad guy. And in our warped narratives about the salvation story, we've unwittingly cast God in the role of the bad guy and Jesus in the role of the superhero who saves us from his malevolent father. We ended by saying that the real reason Jesus is awesome is that he is so much more than a superhero. And his mission is far more than to save us or to satiate an angry God. Rather, his mission is about God being brokenhearted. His mission is about a debt repayment. And this debt is a debt that we're bankrupt to pay on our own. His mission is to help us align the good intentions inside of us with our actions. And ultimately, his mission is for the salvation of the world through the transformation that happens inside the hearts of men and then spills outwards and affects families and communities and eventually the world and creation. And if you missed it, you should. I think you should find 20 minutes this week to listen to it. I think that this is a great starting point for this series that we're walking through. Now, as a way to set up this week's discussion, I'd like to tell you two profound stories, in my opinion, from the story of Jesus. The first story might not seem like a big deal. Even the second story might not seem like a big deal at first glance, but I think they are. In one of the passages of Luke, we encounter a visit that Jesus had with a family in the town of Bethany. Now, we don't have a perfect picture of what life was back then, but we know one thing for sure: women did not have a high place in society. The best example that we have of what it must have been like to be a woman in the time that Jesus walked this earth is to look at the way that women are treated in parts of the world where there is religious extremism with groups like ISIS and such. They were second-class people. They were little more than property, and their role in society was procreation, pretty much. They were not to be found around the men, sitting and discussing religion or politics. And it is against this backdrop that Jesus does something extremely profound. Let's read the passage together in Luke chapter 10, if you have one of these. As they continued their travel, Jesus entered a village. A woman by the name of Martha welcomed him and made him feel quite at home. She had a sister, Mary, who sat before the master hanging on to every word he said. But Martha was pulled away by all she had to do in the kitchen. Later, she stepped in, interrupting them. "Master, don't you care that my sister has abandoned the kitchen to me? Tell her to lend me a hand." The master said, "Martha, dear Martha, you're fussing far too much and getting yourself worked up over nothing. One thing only is essential, and Mary has chosen it. It's the main course and won't be taken from her." I've preached from this passage before, and if you've been in the church for any significant amount of time, you've probably heard somebody speak on this passage. Usually, the person who speaks on this passage is trying to get us to be more like Mary and not like Martha. They do it completely ignoring a parallel that is happening in that moment. First of all, Martha was doing what women in that day were expected to do. They were not to sit among the men like Mary was doing. Martha was upholding the culture. Cover yourself up, go into the kitchen and cook, and leave the men alone. That is what she had grown up with. By Mary sitting there among the men listening to Jesus, she was making everybody uncomfortable. This was a hyper-religious society in which even women did not worship in the same space as the men. They had their own worship space that was at the back. A woman sitting in the room with a religious leader like that was a huge, huge freaking deal. And then Martha makes even a bigger faux pas. She walks into this room full of men and she confronts the holy man. Woman, you're supposed to be absolutely seen and never heard. What are you doing, Martha? How dare you interrupt this meeting? Martha thought that she was probably saving the men from her disrespectful sister who was bringing shame to the family by assuming that she could sit among the men without any real consequence. This was a bad situation. But instead of satiating the men, placating the men, instead of restoring things to the male-dominated version of things that they should be, Jesus does something that must have just shocked everybody. He basically tells her that the things that she is fussing about, the cultural norms, the place of women, the dishonor that she thought Mary was bringing, the dishonor that she must have thought that she was bringing by interrupting this group of men, the things that she was getting worked over were inconsequential. Whoa. In that moment, in that house in Bethany, Jesus is basically telling Mary and Martha, and any woman that will ever read this story, that their place was right in the room, right next to him. In this room, surrounded by a religious leader, surrounded by men, it is a miracle that this story survived and that the people who copied the scripture early on didn't try to delete it, because they still lived in a society that was dominated by men. It is a miracle that we still have the story. And even in our world, the church still struggles with how to treat women as equals. Even in society, we still have a problem with how to treat women as equals. And Jesus was coming against all of this in his time and for thousands of years to come. It's really, really, really powerful. Now, in our Western world, where women enjoy an unprecedented amount of emancipation, the significance of what is happening in this moment can be lost. But we must see it for how truly profound it was. In this moment, Jesus is at his paradigm-busting best. He's a towering fount of wisdom, or at least he seems. He's a champion for women against the backdrop of years of misogyny. Jesus is pretty awesome in this moment. Let's look at another story. Matthew 20, Jesus seems to be at the height of his popularity and powers. And so two brothers and their mom, who were in the group at the time, kind of take him aside and try to get him to make special promises to them. At this time, because of the way that Jesus was acting and operating, they thought that he was going to be a firebrand Messiah who toppled the Romans. They were trying to cast him in a role that he was not interested in playing. And so the mom of these men pulls Jesus aside and says, "Hey, give me your word that these two sons of mine will be awarded the highest places of honor in your kingdom, one at your right hand and one at your left." Jesus was like, "I don't think you understand what you're talking about. And I cannot believe that you think, after all this time that I've been with you, that I'm trying to topple the Roman through military resistance. What's wrong? What have you been missing?" Now, the disciples got really mad. And I think they got mad because they hadn't thought of it themselves first. And so you can see this all play out. Let's read it. Matthew 20, verse 24. When the 10 others heard about this, they lost their tempers, thoroughly disgusted with the two brothers. So Jesus got them together to settle things down. He said, "You've observed how godless rulers throw their weight around, how quickly a little power goes to their heads. It's not going to be that way with you. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. This is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for the many who are held hostage." Wow. Again, this is Jesus at his paradigm-busting best. Why are you 10 people, 12 people, jostling for position? If you want to be great, be a servant. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, gurus and sages say at times when they're trying to sound deep. You cannot reach true enlightenment until yada, 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 yada. Jesus seems to be holding up a great ideal that sounds great when it comes out of his mouth, but it is a particularly difficult one to live out. You see, all around us, people are trampling over rights and privileges of other people in order to better their position in the world. People that you think are your friends at work, that you've shared lunch with and you've invited to your homes for dinner, will stab you in the back to get a promotion over you. And Jesus is asking us, in the face of all of this that we live in, to consider a different road. Be a servant. The path to greatness is not what you think. It's through service. The only way to change the world around us is if each one of us stopped throwing our weight around and started serving one another. Now, it sounds like a really good idea, doesn't it? Jesus sounds like such a wise man in this moment, doesn't he? And for many of us, that's where we stop with Jesus. He is a sage. He is a guru. He's a philosopher. And for a moment, it would seem like the thing that makes Jesus awesome is the fact that he is profoundly wise. The fact that he could step into our world, like we saw in Luke 10, step into this male-dominated world and just bust the paradigm. Be a woman emancipator. Step into the lives of these disciples and say, hey, flip the script, flip the funnel. And in our world where gurus are a very popular thing, it is so easy to put Jesus into the silo of a guru and make him a one-dimensional character. I don't know if you're like me. Every time someone says the word guru or sage, I think of like an Indian or Asian guy with like long flowing robes and like a really long beard. But those are not the only gurus that exist in our world. I mean, there's people that are gurus of economics, of technology, of art, of politics, and on and on. The people that we think are really profoundly wise in these areas. And we often treat them with the same reverence as spiritual gurus. And they play that role in the lives of many people. The words that they say are used as guideposts in the decision-making of the lives of many people. But there is a problem with gurus and sages and thought leaders. While their words seem like they can actually affect change in the world if they're applied, the truth of the matter is that gurus don't possess of their own any real power to change lives. More to that, they are separated from the vast majority of the people to whom they speak. And as a result, they are not directly invested in the lives of those that they speak to. And furthermore, while some gurus try to exemplify through their lives the ideals that they put up, more often than not, they're flawed, just like the rest of us. And so their rhetoric is at a much higher plane than the lives that they live. And so when we actually come in contact with the realness of these people, the halo that surrounds them falls apart. But the biggest problem with sages and gurus and thought leaders is that they have no real ability to change your life. In their construct, you, and you alone, are responsible for the change you want to see. The guru is unable, incapable of helping you outside of lofty words. And in my opinion, this is the reason why people become disenchanted with their gurus. This is the reason why thought leaders flame in and flame out. It is because all of us have tried to use their words and sheer willpower to change our lives and have failed. You know, we've hung inspirational quotes. I have this friend, if you walk into his office, it's just plastered with inspirational quotes. You know, we see them in our homes, and yet somehow, in spite of all these things, we still face the same challenges. We've tried to apply these thoughts of these people to our lives, but our worlds are crumbling around us, and all we can do is try and put Band-Aids over problems that have a much deeper root. So if Jesus is a sage or a guru or a thought leader to you, chances are you will become disenchanted with him as you would with any other thought leader. If Jesus is simply a guru who dispenses words but is so detached and removed and uninterested in your actual life and has no power to actually help you with your life, it's no wonder why people reject him all the time. If I am the only one capable of saving myself, what do I need Jesus for? If in the end I have to bear the weight and responsibility of my actions, then why must I live in my life in service of a sage who has no power to change anything in the first place? And this is where we hit the crux of the matter. Jesus is not a two-dimensional superhero, as we saw last week. He's not a unidimensional sage or guru. You see, if you go back to the passage in Matthew that we read, Jesus says something very profound about himself. Let's look at it again. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. This is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for the many who are held hostage. Jesus doesn't ask us to do something he wasn't willing to do in the first place. He led by example. Jesus does not ask us to live this upside down life in our own strength. No. If you step out in faith, as he takes up residence in your life, you find something really profound starts to happen. You find that he works something out in you, that you're able to live out these things that he spoke of. As we said last week, Jesus didn't go about his job in half measures. He showed the life, he lived the life, he paid the debt in full, and then he sends his Spirit to teach us his life. Jesus does not just possess the words of life. He also is the life. You see, if you make Jesus a sage, you completely miss out on what makes him truly awesome. Now, make no mistake about it. There is a ton of wisdom to be found in Jesus' words. But what sets him apart is that he's not just invested in humans at a verbal level. He literally has skin in the game. He does not just reveal the debt of sin. He pays it in full. He does not just reveal the disparity between the good in us and our actual lives. He gives us his Spirit to help us be the best we can be. He's not just profoundly wise. He's not just a philosopher. He's also in the mud with us. He weeps with us in our sorrows. He groans with us as we go through the weight of our unique struggles. He laughs and celebrates with us when we're doing well. He's profoundly present, active, hands-on, and invested in each one of us. And you see, a lot of people think that the thing that makes someone awesome is that they have influence and power. But most of the time, influence and power is so seductive, and it turns people into oppressors. When Jesus was dealing with the brokenness of the human condition, he didn't come in influence and power, no. He didn't stand in heaven and wave a magic wand. He didn't come to the earth and tell us how bad things were and say, now fix it. He had equal status with God. But he didn't think so much of himself that he clung to the advantages of the status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and became a slave. He became human. And after becoming human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process, you have to admit. He didn't claim special privileges with God. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. It is this desire to experience the human condition in all its frailty, walk as one of us, live as one of us, not just say things but also do them, that makes Jesus awesome. And it is the reason why one of the names that we have for Jesus is Emmanuel, which means God with us. God is present with us, not just in an ethereal kind of, oh, God is with us all the time, but in a skin and bones kind of way. So, would the real Jesus please stand up? I believe he already has. He's not a superhero. He's not a sage. He's not a guru. He's not a thought leader. He is so much more. He is God with us, God with skin on, fully invested in humanity. He would rather put his life on the line than go another day separated from us. This is Jesus, and he's awesome. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Now that we know what we have, Jesus, this great high priest with ready access to God, let's not let it slip through our fingers. We don't have a priest who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through weakness and testing, experienced it all but the sin. So let's walk right up to him and get what he is so ready to give. Take the mercy, accept the help. Amen.